Good morning, everybody. I'd like to go ahead and get started. We have a jam-packed agenda for today, so there's no time to waste, and we want to go ahead and get right off to a good start on this. I want to welcome everybody to the WIRE's fall meeting. As I mentioned, we have a really terrific lineup of speakers and panelists to talk about some of the big issues that we're facing with transmission out there these days. Before I get started with the program, though, I wanted to make some announcements in terms of the WIRE's leadership. At our business meeting yesterday, we had elections for some of the board positions and officer positions for 2024. For our board next year, we will be having Stacey Burberry, who's currently our president, moving up to the board. In addition, Dave Weaver and Brian Gemmel, who are currently on the board, will have their terms extended for another 2 years. On the officer side, we have Jody Moskowitz, who's going to be moving up to the position of president for next year. Yeah, thank you for your sacrifice, Jody. We also have Amanda Rumsey, who's our current treasurer. She'll be moving up to vice president for next year. Dave Burnham will be doing another term as our secretary, and I want to welcome Devin McMacken to the Officer Corps. He's going to be taking over the position of treasurer, and Devin, thank you for your sacrifice as well. So anyway, congratulations to all of our new officers and for those folks who have been put on the board for next year. With the addition of a new board member, that usually means, and it does in this case too, that one of our existing board members will be rolling off of the board. And for this year, Nina Plaushin, who has been a long-serving board member for WIRE's, is going to be rolling off of the board. I want to recognize Nina for her tremendous effort on behalf of WIRE's, her involvement in our organization, and her leadership. Over the course of the last, I don't know how many years has it been, it was before my time, actually. But she's a long-standing and influential member of the WIRE's community. And in recognition of that, Nina, we have a little bit of an award for you.
Well, unexpected. It's a good thing I got here on time. Oh, lovely.
I'm pretty pleased with that, actually. I thought it was pretty cool, to be honest. Yeah. And Commissioner, just so you know, we purposely did not get the gold-plated colored one for our group as well. I want to make sure you knew we had decided not to go down that road. Nina, I'll let you talk if you want to say anything.
Just 2 seconds. Well, I wanted to thank everyone for the award. It's very nice. I have been involved with WIRE's pretty much since the get-go, and it's been an enjoyable group to be part of, and I really have made a lot of friends here. I did want to let people know that, seeing as we're doing goodbyes, I will be retiring next year. I'll be leaving at the end of March, so it's a double goodbye. But nevertheless, I was thinking, well, what could I say that would be pithy and funny? And it occurred to me that, what's the best way to avoid stress at work? Don't go to work. So thank you all very much.
Well, thanks, Nina. That's actually a double hit for the transmission community then, between you leaving, retiring from ITC and rolling off of the board. But in any event, we're going to go ahead and move forward with our agenda. And next, I'd like to introduce our current president, future board member, Stacey Burberry, who will introduce our keynote speaker for today. So, Stacey.
Thanks, Larry, and I'd like to echo your thanks to Nina for all her many contributions to WIRE's as an organization. So it's my pleasure to introduce Commissioner Clements today. Commissioner Allison Clements joined the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in December 2020, following a range of public and private sector experience in energy law and grid modernization policy. During her time on the commission, Commissioner Clements has been a tireless advocate for reforms to make the grid more resilient and reliable. She was quoted earlier this year saying transmission is the #1 solution to the reliability, costs, and security of our system. I'm sure the folks in this room couldn't agree more. Commissioner Clements continues to push the industry to think outside of the box, challenging us to modernize the system through the consideration and implementation of new technologies while keeping all of our customers at the forefront of that decision-making. She also led the formation of the FERC Office of Public Participation, an office designed to address inequities by making it easier for small organizations and individual stakeholders to participate in FERC proceedings. Commissioner Clements and her staff are always willing to meet with stakeholders to talk about issues and concerns and keep an open mind, which is something I know we all greatly appreciate. Finally, before I turn things over to the Commissioner, I would like to exercise my final president's privilege and plant the first question of the day. Commissioner Clements grew up in Ohio and attended the University of Michigan. Those of us who reside in the Midwest are well aware of the tension between those two states. So my question for you, Commissioner Clements, is who will you be rooting for when the Buckeyes and the Wolverines meet on the gridiron later this month? So without further delay, it is my privilege and honor to introduce Commissioner Allison Clements.
Thank you, Stacy. That's a very complicated question. Before I answer it, well, I'll just say, I grew up in Windsor, Ontario till I was 10, was an everything Detroit fan, so I was a Detroit fan when the Tigers were good, the World Series Tigers, when the Pistons were good, the Bad Boys for several years, when the Lions weren't ever good. And I was a dedicated Michigan fan, and my dad was a GM guy. He moved to Michigan when I was applying to college, so I went back. My mother is a tenured extension agent at The Ohio State University, so our family has a lot of things happening. But it's, thank you for bringing that up. But it's nice to see you all, and thanks for having me. Congratulations to Nina, that's great, and to Stacy on her election to the board, and all of the great women who are kind of taking the lead in this organization. It's nice to be part of that and experience it. We meet, in the fancy hotel in D.C. The world is in turmoil. I just want to acknowledge that. Of course, the show must go on, but I know a lot of people in the room feel connections to what's going on in the Middle East and around the world. So certainly my thoughts are with you on that. And of course, here at home, even the challenges that the U.S. faces are daunting. You called me a tireless advocate. I thought, gosh, sometimes I'm feeling really tired. So I'm glad I appreciate that. I'll take it as a compliment. We have aging infrastructure. We have a system that wasn't designed to withstand the threats of the weather that is bearing down on it increasingly. We have an evolving physical and cyber threat to our energy system. The Department of Energy's National Transmission Report that came out this week, I want to read it correctly, said that a robust transmission system is critical to the nation's economic, energy, and national security. This was the first sentence of the report. It is no less than that. So when we find ourselves deep down in the weeds of these conversations about, whose policy caused what line and what trend is going to happen and what the price of this fuel is going to be, we have to remember what we're trying to do here is make progress, right? Is to make that energy system, that electricity national system, strong enough to maintain the United States' role in the world. That depending on the growth scenarios, according to this report, which I read with great interest this week, the DOE estimates an increased need from regional transmission anywhere from 20 to 128% by 2035, and interregional transmission anywhere from 25 to 412% by 2035. Even the low numbers, even the low side of these estimates, which the DOE does not think are the most accurate, are a pretty big challenge for us. And the reality is, and we've been, all the FERC commissioners have been out, I think this month, so you've probably heard me say this a few times, but the reality is that our statutory and regulatory frameworks are not caught up with the need. They are not sufficient. And there's lots of times throughout history when you've had technological disruption and changes where regulations lag behind markets, lag behind other policies, but this is perhaps the quintessential example of that. And we need to figure out how to move forward To me, FERC's part in that is modernizing the rules, is updating them, and then to the extent possible in a world of heavy regulation, allow the markets to do their thing, allow customer demand and corporate interest to drive the world where it wants to go. FERC's job is to help do that affordably and reliably. And so, I come back to what change is required and how do I think about it? How do I come to this challenge? It's, to confront the challenges at every level, to remain data-driven and specific and concrete about problems, to break through rhetoric to how do we get to solutions. And of course, make the changes that are least cost, easiest, nearest term, while at the same time keeping our eye on the harder, long-term, and often more expensive challenges that we also must confront. So I'll speak for a few minutes about how I see those things going on at FERC right now, and then we can open it up to conversation, which is always more interesting. So near term, nothing is easy when it comes to changing regulations and changing the grid, but near term, less expensive, the first thing that comes to mind for me are grid enhancing technologies and operations. So on the operations front, the commission just passed, I forgot the number, Order 901. We just passed a rule on inverter-based resources reliability standards directing NERC to make performance requirements for ride-through and other issues changes that need to happen related to how IBR resources connect to the grid. Of course, they bring with them a tremendous amount of opportunity for a smarter, more dynamic system. We also need to ensure that their integration is reliable. So I think this is an important step. I know that the solar industry in particular, but the industry has been kind of clamoring for just direction and clarity on this front. Certainly the OEMs probably feel that way, and this is a good step in the right direction. The other near-term thing is these grid-enhancing technologies, and I'll talk about them, I guess, first in the context of what we have done at FERC, and as you all know, we've passed a final interconnection rule, Order 2023. This rule is the first step on interconnection. It creates a strong baseline. It looks at utilities and RTOs and ISOs around the country and says, these are best practices. These queues, as you all know, are out of control. They're shut down in some cases. We can't get to the deployment we need to continue, system reliability at lowest cost without accelerating the deployment of the same amount of resources standing in line today to get in that are on the system. And so we've created this strong baseline. I'd encourage you to, we've done commercial readiness, we've done site control, we've done definitive points of interconnection. We've asked utilities to ensure accountability related to steady timing on interconnection. Those are all really important steps, but they won't solve the fundamental problems related to getting interconnection right. And so if you haven't, I'd urge you to read my concurrence in Order 2023, which focuses on what I see as the next steps on interconnection policy, the critical big picture piece, which is we're never going to get it right if we continue to try and use the interconnection system as the way we plan for transmission. We have to do a better job of aligning those two. In the states where we have resource solicitation processes that are relevant, we have to figure out how to align the interconnection processes with those state solicitation processes while remembering that we have discrimination issues and open access things to be focused on for all resources that want to hook up to the grid. We need to think about opportunities for focused interconnection. And I won't get into the specifics on that one. I think we have something pending. Those are the big ones, but there's more in there, so there's lots of good stuff to read. The reality is when we have these complex issues, you don't just solve it like the good old days with one rule, right? This is going to be a series of steps, and we've taken an important step with Order 2023. Bringing it back to the grid enhancing technologies piece of that, we require the consideration of some subset of grid enhancing technologies in the interconnection context. The the studies, the real life experience related to the opportunity to create more near-term space on the system are really impressive, and the dollar numbers are pretty staggering, even when you're talking about one interconnection or one need for network upgrade. Now, it's important to remember that whether it's dynamic line ratings or topology optimization or any other grid enhancing technology, they're not the panacea. They aren't here to replace the need for new significant transmission investment. When you think about those DOE numbers, those are big, hard challenges. But what we can do in the very near term at very modest cost is to create opportunity to defer some of those investments, to provide more space on the system while we're making those investments, but also just to get better asset management and take advantage of the opportunity for the cost savings that can come along with them. So to me, that is easy. It's near term. It's yes and, right? We need both to get those things on the system, and we also need to think about the transmission investment. So that's kind of the near-term stuff. I think the other one is we have a notice of inquiry out on dynamic line ratings in particular. That was not included in our order number 2023, and I am eager to move forward with taking next steps on that front. You know, Chairman Phillips has expressed support for that. Commissioner Christie has expressed interest in that, so I'm hoping we have the opportunity to move forward there. Okay, so then what comes after that? The harder stuff, right? The longer term efforts. The commission has put out a proposal. Many of you are as familiar with it as I am, and probably more so since we've had it out there for a while than I am, is our proposed regional planning and cost allocation rule. You know, the last time the commission took this on was back for Order 1000 era, you know, to 2009, 10, 11, and here we are this many years later, and we still are having trouble getting the hard stuff built. So what this rule does, there's a few things I'm thinking about as I say, okay, how does FERC take next steps on it? One thing in the record I see a lot of support for is the basic premise of long-term, 20-year forward, scenario-based planning using best available data. So I'm pleased to see the commenters who are supporting that and embracing the idea that we have to look forward. We have to figure out ways to get our heads around and start to wrangle in this uncertainty towards needed transmission investment. Then there's a series of things I'm saying, okay, what does the record say about some of these other areas I was pretty interested in when we did this proposal? It seems like there are opportunities to even strengthen the rule in some places. One of those places is on the benefits assessments. The proposal put forward a set of benefits that regions and utilities may consider when it comes to the value of transmission. I see a lot of support in the record for requiring consideration of some subset of benefits. So I'm asking myself, how might we formulate a final rule that requires some set of benefits that most people are considering anyways, but allow for flexibility for those utilities and regions who are taking a broader set of benefits into account? The next area I've been really interested in is on cost allocation. Of course, we have the biggest thing is who's going to pay for these investments, right? And the thing that I'm worried about is kind of effective single state vetoes. We've taken the step to make sure states are sitting at the table and play an important role. But you know, one of the Order 1000 cost allocation principles, which stands true today, is that the reason for the approach we take, costs should be commensurate with benefits, is that there are free ridership concerns. When you're in a shortage situation, whether it's just, you know, a standard old outage or an extreme weather situation on the other end, should we only give the power to the state's customers who paid for it? That's not how we should be going at this problem. So to me, that benefits commensurate with cost commensurate with benefits is the way you protect customers in that situation. But I've seen a lot of support in the record for ensuring that we have some sort of default mechanism for how we pay for these regional projects that are needed in the instance that states don't come to an agreement on how they should get it done. And then the last one, and just to repeat myself a little bit, is the consideration of grid-enhancing technologies and what role those should play. There's been this conversation about whether or not these technologies are useful in the operations timeframe or the planning timeframe. And to me, I understand we have to put them somewhere, but the conversations about we have this bucket of tools. They work in some situations to do some things. So let's not get bogged down in this. You know, you have to understand if they're going to be on the system. That's a planning function, and what kind of impact they're going to have, whether or not you're thinking about existing lines or new development. So that's another place where I think we might be able to provide some increased strength to the rule based on what I'm seeing in the record today. And then finally, you know, I'll wrap it up with, of course, you know, interregional transmission. Perhaps that's the that's the prize at the end of the rainbow. It's never been more obvious, the need for it in this country. And I've said this before, but when I think about check myself. I think the facts are on the side of this generational need for transmission investment. If I'm wrong, what am I right about? I think I'm right about two things: grid enhancing technologies on the existing system and interregional connections across the regions. We've learned this time and time again through extreme cold weather. And so we haven't taken as much action. We haven't moved the ball as far forward at FERC on that front, but certainly it's top of mind for me as another priority that hangs out there. And so with that, I will stop talking at you and hopefully talk with you a little bit. Thanks.
Well, can I have a handheld mic? I'm going to invite the commissioner to join me in the Wires living room area for a little bit of a Q&A back and forth between me and the commissioner. In the meantime, please think about the questions that you have for her. I promised her that this crowd would have quite a few questions for her to respond to. So I'll give a little bit of an opportunity for you to think about it as I talk to the commissioner for a bit. And then we'll turn it over to the audience to see whether they have any questions for you. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you about, it was a topic that actually came up with our group off and on yesterday during some of our business sessions, was the future and the fate of offshore wind, particularly given some of the recent developments and some of the challenges that we've been seeing. New Jersey just had a issue with 2 projects there. We're not sure what the future will be for New York or up in New England. My question for you is, have you given any thought, or are there things that the commission can be thinking about or doing that could address some of these challenges that we're starting to see rise in connection with the development of offshore wind?
It's a really important question, and I know that some of you in the room know more about the specifics of what's going on with these contracts in the Northeast than we spend our time thinking about. As a FERC commissioner, our role isn't to, cheer or lament the success or failure of any given project, right? We are thinking about the system. We are thinking about reliability over time. We are thinking about how you ensure fair rates over time, which requires you to really think, forward about this opportunity for low-cost power to come onto the system. It would be nice in our world if market development took straight lines from point A to point B, and that's not how it happens. I mean, as an industry observer, not as a FERC commissioner, I see this will happen, right? The timelines are in question. Inflation, supply chain, rising interest rates, all are having impact on every industry, let alone one that's trying to establish itself in this moment under an accelerated time frame. So FERC's role to me is to say, okay, if this is going to happen, how do we make sure it happens as affordably as possible? That involves this kind of blank slate almost off the East Coast, where we haven't developed a significant amount of transmission. And to my mind, you're going, and to the mind of people much smarter than me who put out studies, including the Department of Energy, who suggest that you could save $20 billion by 2050 if you optimize the offshore transmission investment to facilitate these projects. We don't want to get in the, I was saying, we don't want to get in the way of these near-term procurements by states. Those near-term procurements might be pushed out a little bit. We want to allow those projects that are getting, the procurements that are including transmission specific to those projects to keep going. At the same time, I think that we need to keep our eyes on the prize of a more optimized system. We have the opportunity to do it right in this case because it isn't already established. I think the states are not waiting around for FERC. You see them working together on how they're going to manage these issues, and that's been encouraging to me. But certainly FERC can be proactive in helping the interregional aspects, especially of those regions, New England, New York, PJM, to kind of continue to make sure we keep moving the ball forward on these really long-term investment requirements.
I'm sure there may be some more questions from folks about offshore wind, but I want to move on to a different topic. And in particular, I caught when you used the word affordability. Right now, we're seeing 2 rising areas that are in some ways in conflict. One is there's clearly a need for a lot of additional transmission development of infrastructure over the next 2 or 3 decades. You can look at different studies that maybe say double or triple the size of the grid on the one hand. On the other hand, there are the concerns over how do we pay for all of this, right? And what's the impact going to be on customers? And I know the Commission's been spending a lot of time looking at particularly that second piece on affordability in the area of how do we address cost issues and things of that nature. You talked a little bit about it with GETS in your opening remarks. I guess what I'm curious to hear from you, there have been a number of different things, and I think different commissioners have different priorities on this question. From your perspective, what area in particular do you think, if the commission were to focus on it, would be most impactful in terms of trying to address that concern? It may not be one, but I'd like you to highlight the higher ones that you think are the ones the commission should be focusing on.
Sure. That's the reality of the place we are in and the reality of the regulatory framework by which transmission gets built and who pays for it, is that it's not, although DOE has been providing money lately, it's not a general revenue bucket, it's customers' pockets, right? And when you think about the numbers, the dollar numbers, you know, money's become funny for us lately, but when you look at, CAISO put out its transmission planning, and it was, for, I forget the number of years, you know, $17 billion, and you think about tranche one, I can't talk about that. Okay. If you think about costs of, you know, these numbers, they're the right dollar numbers. This is what it takes to build up the kind of infrastructure required for the highway, you know, network of this century, the interstate highway network. But that's really challenging for customers, and that's why I think about things like, there's lots of ways to get at it. You know, we have return on an equity. We have the way FERC does formula rates. We have opportunities that I've raised and encouraged we talk about on cost management related to transmission planning, and we talk about GETS, because those are ways to bring legitimacy to the investments we have to make and to discipline the investments we have to make. And so I'm open to lots of them. I think it is, you know, we have commissioners that bring different perspectives to the table. I think Commissioner Christie and I have been really aligned on the need to ensure that we take on cost management as part of trying to facilitate and accelerate this investment. And I think it's, from the perspective of a transmission owner, developer, there's never been another time where those things could live together, you know, so amicably, because those DOE numbers tell you how much there's going to be built. And so there has to be give on the other side, right? There has to be the protection of customers while those significant investments are taking place.
Well, this is another area where I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't have some more questions down the road, but I wanted to at least tee it up for you and get your perspective on it. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, too, you talked about the Commission's pending proposed rule on regional transmission planning and cost allocation, and we know from the Chairman's comments before that the staff is working on that. Excuse me, but of course there were a number of other things that were initiated over the last year or two at the Commission that are out there that impact transmission. Can you talk a little bit about how do you prioritize these various efforts that the Commission has out there? What do you think the right sequencing would be on those as we look forward into next year?
So it's funny, you know, we have a list of, probably everybody has a list of 20, and how many can we realistically do at any given time? You know, the chairman has publicly stated that his #1 priority is regional transmission planning cost allocation, and I 100% support that. From there, you know, to me, this getting next steps on our dynamic line rating notice of inquiry is a critical component, and of course, interregional transmission planning, and I don't know if we'll have the appetite for the whole enchilada or thinking specifically in the context of interregional transfer capability, but that is, to me, on the grid side, what needs to happen.
And then I wanted to also ask you about just the Commission's authority. Last few years, it's kind of interesting to see the level of interest in transmission and the focus on it at various levels of government. FERC's always been very actively involved. DOE's role has expanded dramatically. But it's also interesting to see Congress really engaging on these issues. Commissions try to operate when dealing with all of these challenges that you mentioned earlier with a statutory scheme was created in 1935, I believe, so not quite 100 years old. And I think, the commission's managed to work with the flexibility provided by that scheme to date. But in your mind, in your thinking, does the commission need additional authority from Congress to try to address some of these challenges? And if it does, what areas in particular do you think it would be helpful for Congress to think about acting on?
Here's where I wax poetic about the Federal Power Act, so indulge me for a minute. We have broad authority on FERC. The commission today has broad authority to take action to ensure just and reasonable rates and the avoidance of discrimination. We have clear reliability authority on the bulk electric system side. And that has been tested through and through to the courts. So I don't like to get into the constitutional fights, but I think the kind of robust framework that the Federal Power Act provides and the flexibility as the world has changed over time continues to stand the test of time. I think if we think about reliability on the gas side, that's a really important place where Congress could weigh in. And then, of course, there's lots of ways Congress, because we don't have a NERC-like entity and the commission doesn't have authority. So when we're talking about common mode outages and failures of entire systems in Winter Storm Uri or Winter Storm Elliott, and you have failures all the way from the wellhead productions, which may or may not already be winterized, but still didn't withstand the sustained cold at the temperatures they were experienced, all the way through from production to transportation to generation. That's a lot of different jurisdictions to try and get right to get at that part of the problem. I would love for some of the things that I think are really important to get some emphasis from Congress, because of course those things are helpful, and I probably opened myself up and shouldn't say this, but under our section,
Go ahead.
here we go, under our section 219 authority for incentives from 2005, the commission is supposed to provide incentives for advanced transmission technologies. And so that's on the books. That's already there. I'd love to take, to examine that and make sure that we're implementing our statutory responsibility there in a way that is helpful. But there's lots of things Congress could do to move us along.
Well, actually, we've been focusing a lot on, some of our members are developers and vendors of a lot of different advanced technologies. We've been working on them, trying to highlight those over the last couple of months, and we'll continue doing that into the future. What do you think? What steps should the commission think about taking in terms of providing incentives for advanced technologies?
Thank you for limiting it to advanced technologies. I think this step on DLR is important. I think we could broaden it to be just clearer, to provide some financial incentive to counter the reality that there is no financial incentive for transmission owners to invest in this efficiency, and that's not to the blame of any transmission provider. It's just simple economics and the reason that regulation of this type exists, right? So let's find a way to encourage it. I was at an ESIG meeting in San Diego a couple weeks ago, and there was the person from National Grid UK who's responsible for the transmission system there and planning it. And in there, the transmission owners get all the they get the savings for the increased capacity, or they get paid for the increased capacity that grid enhancing technologies provide. I'm not suggesting that's the right path forward in the U.S., but there are ways to get over the hump that we can continue to work on in the near term.
Okay, well, I'm going to fight my inclination to monopolize the questioning up here and give folks a chance to ask some questions for the commissioner.
Well, Commissioner, Devin McMacken with ITC. First, thanks so much for being with us here this morning. We always like to highlight what we think are successful models that are happening in our regions as potentially a guidepost for policy. And I know you're very familiar with what's happening in MISO with LRTP Tranche 1 and Tranche 2 that potentially is going to be approved next year. So some of the things we've seen there, obviously, are sort of the things you talked about that are under consideration for the planning rule, whether it's a certain set of benefits, building models for the long term based on sort of free exchange of information between stakeholders. And then also there's I don't think it's a coincidence, there's a lot of state ROFR policies in MISO which might be facilitating that process. So I just wonder what you think the lessons learned might be from a process like that and the results that we've seen, and also maybe other sort of regional planning instances that we've seen around the country, and how that's guiding your thinking potentially for what a good planning and cost allocation rule might look like.
Yeah, that's a great question, Devin. And I was just talking with Derek and Aubrey and their colleague earlier this week about MISO, and don't like to prejudge. I'm not allowed to prejudge anything, but I really appreciate their perspective on it, which is that they engage very specifically with the broad set of stakeholders across the MISO region and are able to come to solution sets by thinking through the benefits that are provided for needed investment. And from the planning rule, as I said earlier, we need to make sure that we're counting all the benefits. If we're not counting all the benefits, then customers are losing, right? We're losing efficiencies there, and there's a lot of money left on the table. But we also have to acknowledge and recognize that different benefits above and beyond some basic set, or maybe within it, but I'm still thinking about that, provide flexibility to regions who have spent a lot of time thinking about this and are doing good work on that front.
Oh, come on, that can't be it. Oh, here we go, here we go, here we go.
Good morning, Commissioner. It's always a pleasure to see you. Karen Honoran with Elcon. Going to ask a question that's probably not very popular in this room, and I'll probably get disinvited by Larry in future. But wanted to talk about independent transmission monitor. So is FERC getting a robust enough record to consider it? Is there more information that is needed in the record, or is this just a non-starter?
We have an open complaint. Miles is giving me the
we have an open complaint.
On that one.
Okay.
So we're going to leave it there.
All
but
right.
You get to come back next year, so that's
I can
great.
come back next year.
I'll just mention, that's an interesting question, because people I know have been debating whether that would preclude the commissioners from being able to talk about the generic issue generally. So I think we've got some answer to that question right now. So.
Looking at me like I was wrong.
Good morning, Commissioner. Thanks for being here. I'll go back to I'll bite on the offshore wind topic. So the transmission model for offshore wind is evolving, and trying to build new transmission that goes out in the water. Most that's going to be DC converter stations to DC, and trying to get ahead of the risk of because that model makes sense, right? We recover the cost over a long period of time. We put multiple cables and corridors and minimize disruption to communities. But those assets, if they're built ahead of the generation, might go into service over a period of time, right? New Jersey is talking about pre-built infrastructure, which is conduit and pulling cables later. Has FERC thought at all about that business model for extending the grid to the water and under FERC jurisdiction, and if there's any clarity or things that FERC ought to be doing to support that business model, right? The extension of transmission into the water to support offshore wind.
Well, Stu and I both know that he knows more about, has thought this through more than the commission has, but I've thought about it a lot, and I think absolutely when you talk about proactive, forward-looking planning, even if you're just aligning interconnection processes, but if you're actually doing a robust planning process, and we're back.
Yeah.
You're thinking about how you do that proactively, and we have good examples in Texas and California where that has been done to great success, and also even in the Midwest to some extent. It works, right? The benefits are big. Customers save money. It's a great way to operate a system. It's a great way to run business, right? But in the Northeast, to my mind, it's interregional. And and I think the states have come together, and there's an opportunity for the regions to take next steps, right? For the stakeholders, if it's the states and the utilities and whoever else is part of the conversation, to help the RTOs work together to come up with a plan to start. And I think, there's a lot, these are big dollar numbers. The planning step is a good first step. It doesn't, it could be done in a way that allows for the conversation to become a lot more concrete and data-driven before you get to who's going to pay. It would be helpful to understand those numbers, right? So can FERC play a role there? Absolutely.
Good morning, Commissioner Clements. Jody Moskowitz, PSEG. You were talking about extreme weather. And that's a topic that the transmission owners obviously have spent a lot of time thinking about and continue to think about and quite frankly worry about it. Because, you know, what we have talked in the past about black swan events just don't seem to be black swan events anymore. It's like every year there's something happening and huge issues on the system. I know that FERC and NERC are going to be issuing a joint inquiry report on Winter Storm Elliott soon. Do you think that there's more that FERC and or NERC can or should be doing on the extreme weather front, whether it's from a transmission grid planning perspective, a resource adequacy perspective, et cetera? Just interested in your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. It's a really important question. I think the first 12 or so of my meetings when I was on the commission, each month I documented a different extreme weather event that had taken place that month. And this might be kind of a punt on your question, but, well, first of all, to say can we do more, I would suggest that if there's anything that the four of us currently, as four commissioners currently agree on, it's the importance of addressing the extreme weather threat and all threats, right? Physical and cyber and extreme weather threats. So it's not to suggest we haven't been trying hard, but nothing is unrelated. System planning, market design, you know, which services does the system need and how do we pay for it, and performance requirements and getting paid for showing up when you're needed, reliability standards, the operational protocols, the way that we integrate grid enhancing technologies, all of these things matter relative to the extreme weather threat. And so if we were starting from a blank page, we might design the way we do this system a lot differently. But we have a whole lot of entrenched processes and rules and laws to inform how we do it. So, you know, I think it's a useful frame, it's a useful lens to view all of these things together in terms of how they interact.
Stacy?
Thank you. Commissioner Clements, with respect to the joint federal and state task force on electric transmission, do you foresee any sort of concrete policy developments, and or do you also see that potential model of discussing issues in a joint forum as something that could be useful as we consider issues like resource adequacy, et cetera, into the future?
Thanks, Stacey. I really think there's been already successes from the joint task force. And for those of you who don't pay attention to this all day, it's when Rich Glick was chair, he and the then head of NARIC, Paul Shalander from Idaho, established a FERC for all the FERC commissioners plus representatives from 10 states across the country, an ongoing task force conversation on some transmission issues. And I think the proposal we put out on regional planning and cost allocation was absolutely informed by the perspectives that were shared with the commission through those conversations. I think that it has created an opportunity for education. So we did have, not to sound like a broken record, but we did have a conversation on grid enhancing technologies, and I saw both on my side, right, learn new things, and also in the states, they worked hard to prepare for those conversations, and there was an education process just through that that created more understanding for all of us related to the opportunities. So I think it's a great forum. I think it allows us to have conversations that are harder. I think there are also already great conversations going around. Like if you look in the West on the conversations between states and utilities and market participants on resource adequacy, it's a vibrant conversation. And so to me, anything more that FERC takes out on that front would be additive and complementary to not to take resources away from other good examples like that one.
Do you see the joint federal state task force continuing to move forward in the future? And do you see any change in terms of the focus or the goals associated with that if they do? And what are they?
Yeah, well, I hope it continues and we'll see. I don't know.
What about the goals and the?
There's so much we can talk about. I mean, all the things I just mentioned related to extreme weather. I think there are so many opportunities for collaboration, and it'd be interesting to bring the labs to the table, or the Department of Energy to the table, when you think about methodologies and common metrics across regions and things that it's really important. FERC is deep in its roots for the last 23 years, is this ability to allow for regional flexibility. I mean, that is now kind of the starting place, and for good reason. In some cases, I think there are opportunities to not fear consistency and benefits metrics, methodologies for resource adequacy, or at least trying to figure out how to make different resource adequacy methods interact with each other. There's stuff on capacity accreditation I probably won't talk about, but there's lots of ways that states and the federal government can work together to learn. Demand-side resources, again, at a high level, interoperability, the way that just the distribution system continues to evolve in evolving ways, impact load growth and load forecasting, et cetera. There's lots and lots of ways that we could grow this. It's just how many hours are there in the day, right? And state regulators are very busy people to try and prioritize across this.
Drew? Oh, I'm sorry.
Peter Brim with CTC Global. Looks like we're going to be in a sustained high interest rate environment for some time. Probably, if it's a fact, high interest rates are probably a factor in Ørsted's announcement yesterday. And at some point, even for utilities, high interest rates become an issue at some level. Is that macroeconomic environment, does that rise to the FERC level, or do you engage in that at all? And if so, is there anything FERC can do to help mitigate this environment that we may be looking at for several years now?
Yeah, we have authority over the rates of transmission service, and over the sale for wholesale, this wholesale sales of electricity. So of course, costs affect what we do in many different ways. Are we at the forefront of trying to mitigate interest rate context? No, certainly not. But it would be, everything we do is to facilitate what's happening in the world, and everything that's happening in the world, it relates to that.
I think I saw Nina raise her hand.
Since I'm, is it on?
It's on.
Since I'm retiring and no longer care. So here's my question. Obviously, we know we're coming towards the end of the congressional session, and Commissioner Danley will probably be, his term may or may not be ending, but we think it's ending. What does that do in terms of your ability to move the large rulemaking, the planning and cost allocation? So I'll make it easy for you. It's multiple choice.
Yeah.
No effect, easy or harder?
I'll let you all pontificate on the palace intrigue of what's going to happen at FERC, but you got to keep your eyes on the prize, right? We have a lot of work to do. There are times when the commission has been lots of different numbers, 3, 4, and 5, and my goal is to keep moving forward on these priorities that are so important.
Okay, how about, follow-up question. Your term is up in June. Are you planning to seek reconfirmation?
I am planning to keep doing what I'm doing through the end of my term.
Thanks, Drew. Thanks, Commissioner. I'm going to change the conversation for you here a little bit.
Perfect.
We're going to pivoting back to extreme weather that Jody mentioned, and I think I heard you say when you were talking about interregional, a big deal, a priority, but maybe the commission hasn't made as much progress on it, and maybe that's related to Congress directing NERC to do the study, but. As the commission staff evaluates the extreme weather vulnerability filings that many of us in this room made last month, how do you see that fitting in with how the commission's going to be thinking about interregional? That's two-part question, one. And two, given, the questions that Nina just asked about, Commissioner Danley maybe not being at the commission, is there opportunity for for WIRES to come in and kind of talk with the commission more about interregional planning, how the extreme weather could fit in? Like, is there could we aid in that, knowing that the commissions may be in a little bit of flux over the next year?
Yeah. And you know better than most, Jamie, about what that means for, getting things done and the reality, regardless of who's on the commission, of how much staff can do at any given time. So, staff work really hard on all of these things. One of the frustrations, this is a little meta, maybe not as concrete to start your answer, but I'll try and get to it, is that as we said before, right, to Nina's or to Jody's point, all of these things are interrelated, but you have to take them in bite-sized chunks. You have to put parameters, and so when we deal with extreme weather in one docket and get reports in another docket, they should inform each other, and hopefully they will, right, because we read the records, but there's a reality to creating some boundaries around these things. When it comes to interregional planning, absolutely WIRES members can play a big role. The more you can do to keep this issue alive and in our faces, the more you can do to come up with, we have lots of record. Highlight things in that record. If you think there are places where good, ideas are evolving or opportunities are evolving, or the impact of the debt ceiling deal have changed the dynamic, keep that in front of us. Keep talking to us. Keep talking about it in these forums. Make it a public issue, because that helps to keep the momentum alive in ways that doesn't let us forget about it while we have all these competing priorities.
Good morning. This is Sally Thomas from First Energy. Just a quick question for you. So you spoke a number of times about the need for transmission build-out and how we want to increase the ability to, have transfer capability over reliability and resiliency of our system. And as a transmission owner, obviously we're looking to optimize our existing facilities. But I guess any thoughts in terms of what FERC is doing to try to encourage greenfield construction? What we can do from the zoning challenges, the many zoning challenges that are out there, especially from a local perspective.
Yeah, that's the other hard part of the statutory and regulatory framework I was talking about, right? FERC can put out this perfect rule on interregional transport capability and a rule that you all cheer about on regional planning and cost allocation, and even if every single person agrees, that's not the end of the story. The country has to decide it wants to build transmission. And you see that playing out at DOE in like a really enlightened Department of Energy. Don't print that. I think they're really focused in an important way on transmission. And you see, states who are in the game and who want to get to yes on this, but these permitting challenges are really hard. FERC's responsibility is a little bit ancillary right now. We have backstop siting authority related to the NHTSA designations, and we've put out a proposal for how we would implement that. I think FERC can be helpful, but we're not the main player in this conversation. We should be at the table trying to help in ways that we see make sense based on our jurisdiction.
I actually want to follow up on that a little bit, particularly on your mentioning of DOE. Can you talk at all about or elaborate on what's the relationship going on between FERC and DOE, the level of collaboration? Back in my day, DOE didn't seem like it was much of a player, frankly, on transmission. I think that's changed significantly over the last few years. Can you talk a little bit about what the coordination is on different transmission issues between FERC and DOE?
I think, the staff, most of the coordination takes place as it should be from a technical assistance perspective, so I'm not going to get too into that. Would you say anything else about that?
Yeah, the chair and staff manage that coordination, but certainly the agencies are talking.
Yeah.
Yes, the chair and the staff manage that interaction, but certainly the agencies are talking.
Yeah.
Said Miles.
Probably have time for one more question. Bill, go ahead.
Thanks a lot for coming, Commissioner Clements. It's great to see you. Always awesome to hear your thoughts. And so Bill White with Norton White Energy on behalf of the Great Plains Institute. So Larry, you stole my question, but I'll just I'll put a finer point on it. With the IRA and the infrastructure law, there's just a bunch of stuff at DOE now that never existed before. I mean, it's to say it's a quantum leap is really an understatement. So, and there's direct money for things like siting, planning, interregional planning, offshore wind, economic development around communities affected by transmission lines. So it seems to me that it's presenting some really new challenges that really get close to or into things that FERC is responsible for. So I just wanted to, is there any more you can say specifically about that? And that's not even counting, the GRIP funding, the EPA programs that could also involve transmission because they're climate programs and they're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So is that, how's it going, I guess, more? I mean, I know I heard what Miles just said, but is there anything more you can say about that? And just, just raising awareness. I mean, this is a bunch of new stuff that would never existed before. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't live in this, right? You all who have interest in the DOE opportunities do more than I do. I think it's really exciting, and if you think about, I don't know, like intuitively, the JTIQ award, which is a really big deal, or other opportunities for funding from DOE helps to take a little bit of the edge off increased capital costs and off rising interest rates. I don't know how that plays out because I'm, an observer over here looking to see if it is. There's no reason that these federal agencies shouldn't be at the table with very transparent, very public coordination. And in a lot of ways that is happening, and that's exciting. So I think for that part, I share your enthusiasm and your encouragement related to the difference that DOE is making, that the deployment office is, that the grid deployment office is making, and the other opportunities that exist there.
Well, Commissioner, I want to thank you and your staff, Miles, Alex, for being so generous with your time and being here to talk to our group. We're always interested to hear what the thoughts are of you and your colleagues over at FERC. So thank you again for coming here and appreciate your willingness to share your perspective on some of these transmission issues. So everybody, please join me in thanking Commissioner Clements.
Thank you for having me.
So we're just going to take a little brief break. Don't get up and run too far because we're going to go right into our next panel, which is focused on Order 2023, the generator interconnection rule, and we're going to get a number of perspectives on that rule and what we can look forward to going ahead in terms of the challenges related to the implementation of it. So don't go too far. We're just getting people mic'd up. So.